What is your "we will never speak of this again" moment? I moved into a Gumtree housemate situation. The housemate will be called Scott. I have cystic fibrosis, but I never bring it up. Since I'm a very lucky and healthy person, I moved in with Scott without ever mentioning the CF. After about 3 months later, I had a really bad dehydration issue. I'm completely body locked, think epic cramps, but full body. I'm full body locked in my bed in my pants with a pile of edibles to my left, a few dirty dishes to my right, and on top of that, I've been CF farting for hours. CF farts are paint stripping. I panic and finally decide it's serious enough that I need to go to the hospital. So I text Scott, who is just in the common room on the other side of the wall. I tell him something like, "Hey, I'm having a medical emergency. I can't walk. I can't even get up. Can you come into my room and help?" He was shocked and he thought I was properly healthy. He comes into my horrible fart cavern and sees how much pain I'm in and how I actually am. He goes into dad mode, ignores my messy room, ignores the stank, and says not a word. He picks me up and carries me to his van, throws me in the back so I can stay in the same shape, drives me to the hospital, carries me out, and gives me to the nurses. 10 or 12 hours later, I'm released, IV dripped, and hydrated. The nurses and he had talked and he's there to pick me up. I thank him. He tells me that he's got love for me, then takes us home. I slept for like 14 hours. We haven't spoken of it again. He knows how much it meant to me. I bought him a bottle of booze and a bunch of cured swine. To this day, Scott is one of my best friends in this town. I consider him a hero. I could have just locked up and been in pain till I dragged myself to the road and called 911. Oh, and he hasn't mentioned it once. He knows it's really embarrassing for me. It was business as usual the next day. Love you, Scott. Now that is a true friend and an even better roommate. Story 2. One day, about 7 years ago or so, I went hiking with my sisters. It was fun but exhausting, so I decided to take a shower when we got back home. I was also in the mood for some extra stress relief. I start undressing and notice a little brown spot about halfway down my inner thigh. Upon close inspection, I realize it's a big fat tick. Oh crap, I think. This bastard's been stealing my fluid for hours and who knows how many more are on me that I can't even see. I know I can't handle this situation alone, so I do what any sane, rational person would do. I burst out of the bathroom after fumbling with the doorknob, ran straight into the living room where my eldest sister is watching TV and said, "I have a situation that requires your assistance." Except all she heard was, "Huh? Help!" So she looks at me confused and then bursts out laughing. That was when I realized I was standing in the middle of the living room in my birthday suit. I cover my shame and run back to the bathroom to grab a towel. My sister stops laughing enough to come check on me, and I finally manage to put into words that I have a tick, I need help removing it as well as checking for more. My mom hears all the racket and starts coming out of her room to see what's what. At the same time, my sister looks me in the eye with the kind of face that just screams, "You're a moron," as she quickly and elegantly grabs my toy off the bathroom counter and chucks it into the cabinet under the sink right before my mom turns the corner. She ended up helping get rid of the tick and checking for more, obviously trying very hard not to laugh while I just sat there in silent misery. Afterward, I begged her to never mention this to anyone. I threw my toy away later that week on garbage day so nobody else would see it. Anyway, my sister passed away a couple days ago from what we believe was her own doing. Oddly enough, this is my favorite memory of her, despite how embarrassing it is, although I'll never be able to share it with the rest of my family. Okay, so the ending on this one is totally unexpected, but still, it's a nice story, a funny one at that, and a great memory to have of someone you loved. Story 3. Not me, but my father's story. During World War II, my father was a photographer for the 9th Army Air Corps. Most of the time, it was ground-based, but occasionally he flew. During the lead-up to D-Day, he flew multiple missions in a bomber converted to a stereoscopic camera, 3D imagery platform. The bay had been gutted and the camera installed there. They would fly over France and take pictures until they either ran out of film or the Luftwaffe showed up. To minimize detection, they flew alone with the escort fighters circling out over the channel. In the event of a strike, they'd drop until they were skimming the waves and run for England, passing under the fighters who'd engaged the Germans while they fled. This, of course, did have its risks, and on more than one occasion, they'd be caught too deep into France or the German fighters would get the drop on them and they'd have to man the guns. Crew size meant even the photographers had to man a gun. So, with all that, here's the let's never speak of this again moment. They were still at high altitude. One of the firearms jammed, and the gunner took off his glove and ended up freezing his hand to the metal of the gun. He's yelling for help, and my dad goes over and says, "There's two ways to get your hand off. Either we yank it off and take the skin off, or we use warm liquid. I know of only one source of that. Never tell anybody about this," he said. Dad didn't keep his word, and thus was born the often told story of how my father peed on a crewmate's hand and the guy thanked him for it. As they say, desperate times, desperate measures. Story 4. I was on my way to spring break, driving from Ohio to Florida when I got pulled over. Being a confident 19-year-old, I had been steadily smoking grass the whole time. But that wasn't even the worst of it. I also had more that I would be sharing with my buddy in Florida. The cop tells me to get out of the car since he can smell grass. He sits me in his passenger seat and starts interrogating me. I openly admit how much I have since I know he knows it's there. The hard substances were in a Pringles container with a false bottom and a bag full of regular snacks. I figured I'd be safe with that. However, during the questioning, I began to think, what if he knows these stash cans exist? When he finally asked me if I had more in the car, I hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, I knew I gave away that I had more on me, so I told him where to find them. After searching my car, he finds everything exactly where I told him, and he asks me, "What would your parents think?" So he calls my dad. Afterwards, he handed me the phone, and that went about as well as expected. The cop then had me throw my bowl and grinder in the woods, dump all the substances out, hand me his card, shake my hand, and off to spring break I go. I talked to my dad afterwards, and while I'm not any kind of user, he had his concerns. But I learned my lesson and gave up trying to have a cool party lifestyle. He never even told my mom. The end of that conversation was, let's put this in the vault and never speak of it again. Well, that's a pretty cool dad. I wish my dad was a little bit more like him. Lucky OP. Good for you. Lesson learned. Story 5. Oof, I'm late, but it's a fun story. Back in high school, the band and orchestra room and choir room had a storage room between them. There were a few rooms for practicing, and one of them had a piano in it. I love playing bass, but not nearly as much as I liked goofing off on the piano. So one day, it's practice day, and for the students who tried it all, especially non-violin players, it was a free day. So my viola friend and a cello friend of ours went to the piano room to play. I sat down to play, and the other two browsed the internet while I was doing that, since there's also a Mac in there for practicing and such. And before I start playing, I see glue on the keys. Really odd. Whatever. I play for like half an hour. Whatever I played back in the day, taking requests from the crowd, having a jolly old time. But after a while, I told them, "Hey guys, you see this? What in the world?" So they felt it and were confused too, like it's gluish but it hasn't been dried yet. Whatever, I keep playing and they keep browsing. As we realize there's about 5 minutes left in class, Viola Man says we should pack up. And as he goes for the handle of the door, sees a balloon or something. Does that have the... Oh God, we all realize what has happened in this room probably 10 minutes prior to our entry to it. Immediately leave, wash our hands in the water fountain for the remainder of the class, and promise to never speak of this to anyone. And Viola Man and Cello Girl, if you ever come across this, I'm sorry I broke our promise, but hey, I was the most involved anyway. Hold on, wait a minute. Instead of going to the bathroom to wash their hands in the sink, they wash their hands in the water fountain? For everyone else to drink out of? Sucks to be the next guy to do that, hey? Story 6. A good friend of mine and I were traveling to Boston for a college sports team reunion. My good friend, let's call him Mark, was on the adventurous side. He decided to eat an edible. He texts me from the bathroom on the plane. He says to bring the shirts from his carry-on. Mark had thrown up all over and had massive blowouts all over himself and the floor. He was way too baked, and the brownie plus some suspect Indian curry 90 minutes before the flight microwave was not the best idea. It was, hands down, the grossest thing I had ever witnessed in a non-death scenario. The smells bombarded my senses. The tight space, coupled with the heat of 2 grown men in a small area, made for a horrible experience. I attempted to wash as much as I could with the hand pump water faucet, cramping my forearm in the process. I brought my duffel bag into the room, hopefully to exchange the clothes. We clean it up, and as we are almost done, I end up throwing up all over him just as Mark was finally clean. We look at each other, covered in the second round of spew courtesy of a crappy McDonald's McGriddle and a bag of Sour Patch Kids candy. After about 20 solid minutes and non-solid bowel movements, we finally exit the area and go back to our seats. We have 3.5 hours remaining, including a layover in O'Hare. We land in O'Hare and our next plane gets delayed due to weather. Following the first delay, our plane has engine problems and a new plane has to be selected. With the coming rainstorm, including thunder and lightning, we get canceled. We get on the first flight in the morning to our final destination of Boston, only to find out that our reunion event has been canceled due to a tragedy the night before. We hop on the first taxi back to the airport, and my friend says, "We are never speaking of this trip ever again." And I reply, "Yeah, this trip was crap, literally." Alright, so are these stories making you cringe or laugh or both? Either way, let me know by hitting the like button and subscribing for more embarrassing moments. Here's story 7. Me and my friend were in my car at about 11 on a Friday night. Radio 1 was playing some live dance music with Judge Jules. Windows were down, it was a lovely warm night, and the twilight was still there for us to stare at like mongs as we got baked from the green. Now, this car park is up in the mountains, and there's quite a bump at the entrance. It is very weird why it is so high because you can't see any cars in there if you are just passing by on the road. Anyway, we are dragging our stuffs, and over the bump comes a police car. We're about 3 spaces from that entrance. It stops right in front of us. I have the interior lights on and low lights on the outside. There's so much smoke in and around the car that you'd think it was catching fire. The place must stink. The police car's window was visibly ajar. I looked at the officer in the eye. The officer looked at me. My mate looked at the officer in the eye. The officer looked at him. All of a sudden, some girl lifted her head from what looked like his lap, and the officer glanced at her, then back at us, then back at her, then back at us. He turned his car around and went off quickly. We kept eye contact as he went past to get out of the car park. The lady is probably hiding her shame out of sight. 3 men made an agreement to never speak of this. Balance was restored, but damn, the giggles in my car for the next 20 minutes were epic. Story 8. I followed a bunch of weird blogs and tags on Tumblr and was scrolling through my feed. I would usually alt-tab in 0.1 seconds if I was doing something private. I didn't bother to hide what I was doing, kept scrolling, then turned around while still scrolling to see my mom come into my room to put some laundry on a cabinet. Unbeknownst to me, right as she came into the room, on my screen was a huge picture of a horse. I have no idea why it was on the blog since it was not a blog for horses and I did not intentionally look for it, but it was right there in the middle of the screen. If you looked in my direction, there's no way you didn't see it. I don't know if she was looking since she was only in for a second and we didn't really chat or whatever, but I am assuming my mom saw me looking at it and thinks I like this quirk. I don't like horses, but there's never going to be an opportunity for me to weasel my way out of that situation. I mean, it is embarrassing enough to have yourself get caught red-handed to be doing something with your hands, but to be doing it to a picture of a horse? Oof, that's another level of embarrassment I could not be able to live through myself. Story 9. When I was a teenager, my best friend was over and we were drinking. I was probably 14, 15. My mom had just recently found out my stepdad cheated on her and they got into a huge fight that night and he stormed off and left. My friend went out to our loft on the second floor and came running back into my room and said, "Hey, your mom is trying to off herself." I ran out of my room and saw a curtain tied around the banister of the loft and my mom standing on a chair. I was screaming and sobbing that I'd do it too, and I meant it too. That was the only thing that made sense to me as an intoxicated teen at the time. The only way to get my mom to not hurt herself. She got down from the chair and we both sobbed together. She then had an inpatient stay for a few days after that. We've not spoken about it since. I've minimized and blocked the story out of my brain pretty much since it's happened, and now that I'm seeing reactions to it, I realize this is something that shouldn't be minimized and I should probably deal with it. My mom and I live states away from each other, and this, unfortunately, is just a blip within the issues that have compounded since then. She refuses to step foot in a therapist's office, not for lack of me trying to get her there, and refuses to acknowledge her mental health is an issue. Because of these reasons, it's not really an option for me to revisit this with her, and I would very likely do more harm to her than good. But I know I should address this in therapy for myself. Story 10. My sister and I thought we had a moment like this, but we spoke of it years later and we both had a misunderstanding all along. I grew up with 2 sisters. I was the youngest, and there were 2 years between each of my older sisters. My middle sister and I were closer to each other than we were to the older one. One time when I was about 15, my mom found used rubber in the trash. Since my oldest sister was living away from college at the time, we figured it wasn't hers. So my sister and her boyfriend, who thought she was being a good sibling, thought it was mine and took the blame for it. I don't think she got in much trouble, but she thought she was doing me a favor. It was actually not mine, and I assumed that since she accepted blame for it, then it was her. Nothing more happened. Years later, I was out with my sister and her boyfriend, the same one from high school, and she jokingly made a comment trying to get me to do her a favor, like, it's the least you could do after I took the blame for that rubber for you that one time. I was so confused and had no idea what she was talking about till she explained the event and we realized the years-long unspoken event. I guess it must have been my sister who had been home from college in secret for a while. There was no husband for my mom at the time, so no cheating allegations. We had a good laugh for the rest of the night. I still think it's funny that we both interpreted the event in such different ways for so long. If you were wondering why my sister would have been home from college in secret, this sister did and still does a lot of shady things, hide stuff from us, etc. So it wouldn't have surprised me at all if she were home for a quick one and told none of us. People are also saying it's likely my sister was cheating on her boyfriend, but if that were the case, I would think she would have just denied it being hers altogether and also not brought it up again years later in front of that boyfriend. Story 11. The time I showed my wang to my father because I thought it was shrinking. I was 17. At school, I ate something for lunch that didn't sit well with my stomach. Next thing I know, I'm in my classroom, hunched over, feeling like my stomach is combusting. So I go into the bathroom to find that it has become short and black with the skin crusty and dry. When I got home, I was hysterical because I thought I would lose it or that this was permanent. I decided to swallow my embarrassment and show my dad. We did nothing about it, and eventually the skin went back to normal and grew back to an almost normal size. However, it is not as long as it used to be. Still, to this day, I don't know if the food I ate was the cause of it. It was just a slice of pizza. My dad and I have never spoken of that day ever again. Okay, so after that last story, thank you, really, thank you for sticking around and soldiering on through secondhand embarrassment and a bit of sadness and pain. If you enjoyed hearing about these, then you gotta go watch the next one. What is your all-time most embarrassing moment? Story 1 will have you in stitches. I'll see you there. Thank you for watching this one.